Yeah, guys, make it fast. Make it fast. Check once. If I'm audible, then type C or Y. Yeah, guys. Check once I'm audible or not. Waiting for your reply. Okay, then we'll start. See, we'll start. We'll start our example to use two annotations. One is embeddable and embedded ID. Yesterday I told you how to map our Java class with composite primary key. I won't tell you that how to map our Java class with a composite primary key. Okay, that is what requirement. Let's start. There are two new annotations you are going to learn. In that, one new annotation is @embeddable and second one is @embedded ID. Okay. So today we will have example to understand this. We'll have an example to understand this. So first I want to create a new Maven project. Obviously, we are going to create a new Maven project. And yeah. Okay. Let's go ahead, guys. Yeah. We'll wait for all the archetypes to display. I'm waiting for the archetypes to display. So once I got all the archetypes, I want to choose my archetype here. What is my archetype? That is Maven archetype quick start. Maven archetype quick start. Okay, guys, that is what I just want to write. Maven archetype quick start. And here we go. Application name artifact ID. I would like to use artifact ID as something like okay, or embeddable. I'm writing embeddable application. Embeddable app, something like this. I just want to make my artifact ID as embeddable app, and then package name I want to type is com.ait.entity. Then I want to click on finish. So obviously it's asking for my confirmation at the last. Say why. So we got a build success, and here the project directory structure is created. Now this is my embeddable app, the first one. Let's start creating entity classes. As yesterday we discussed, we want to create one embeddable class and one entity class. So now I am creating first. I want to delete this app.java file. Whenever we create a Maven project, as you know that automatically one file generated called app.java, which is simply like a hello world application, hello world program simply. We can delete this file. Now let us open pom.xml. Whatever the dependencies that we have added in our last example, the same dependencies I would like to add even for this also. Hibernate dependency, JPA dependencies, MySQL driver dependency. Dependencies are nothing but jar files. Next one are the JAXB dependencies, which Hibernate uses them internally. JUnit dependency is there, that is automatically available. You no need of writing this dependency. You no need of writing those dependencies. Okay. I have included what Hibernate dependency, JPA dependencies, MySQL driver dependency, and JAXB dependencies. These each dependency is nothing but a jar file. And here we need to choose what? We need to select what? Compiler source 11. Compiler target, that is also 11. Java version 11 we are using here. Save it. Okay. Now I'll update the project, but before that, as we are aware that we need resources folder in main, but by default under main folder, resources folder is not created, only Java folder is created. So first open src folder, then you can right click on this main, new folder. Do remember folder name must be what? Resources only, not resource. It is what? Resources. Folder name is resources. Finish. I repeat again, folder name is what, guys? Resources. Okay, then I would like to update this project. Okay. Now let us start creating the files. Under entity package, I am creating two classes. First, I am creating one class. I'll tell you the class name. Okay. Suppose class name I want to take is student composite key. My class name is like this. And remember, it is not an entity class, but this is what class? Embeddable class. So annotation we should write is @embeddable. Yesterday I have explained theoretically. Today we are discussing practically. Next, what are the properties of embeddable class? The embeddable class should contain properties that are mapping with the composite primary key. So as per our example, roll number and section. Yesterday we discussed now. Roll number and section combination is called what? Composite primary key. So we want to map the two properties with the two columns of the table. @ column is annotation. What I am writing @ column? Name equals to roll number. Private integer roll number. Okay. What is that? Private integer roll number. Roll number. What next after this? One more column I want to map. What is a column name? Column name equal to section. Private, what I can say? String section. Section is a string now, right? Of course, I can avoid here. This is optional. Okay, it is optional. Why this is optional? Because yeah, both are same here. What is a variable name is a section. and mapping with a column called section. So column name is matching with the variable name. If a column name is matching with the variable name, then writing this at the rate column annotation is what? Optional. Yes. And we want to define all the setter and getter methods. We want to define all the setter and getter methods here. Okay. Okay, right? Setter and getter methods. So basically we got the setter getter methods. This is called embeddable class. Now we should start writing the student entity class. And okay, one more important point. It must implement whenever you are creating embeddable class. Remember, embeddable class must implement what? Serializable interface. So implements what? Implements what? Serializable interface. Yes. You know, serializable is a marker interface here. So we don't need to override any methods of it because serializable is a marker interface. Serializable is a marker interface. In core Java classes, you got it already. Next. Next class, what I'm creating is new class, and class is my student entity. What is my class now? Student entity. This time we are creating entity class. Okay, right? Entity class. So entity class must contain on top of the class which annotation at the rate entity. Next at the rate table to map it with the database table name. Table name is, say for example, TBL underscore students. Table name is TBL underscore students. Actually, entity class must contain ID. If not, embedded ID. One of the two is mandatory. Otherwise, it is not called entity class. Simple point. Entity class must contain ID. If there is no ID in entity class, or if there is no at least embedded ID in that entity class, then it is not called entity class. Okay, entity class must contain ID. That's why it is called entity class. So, but here ID is not possible. Embedded ID is possible. Embedded ID means what? Combination of properties is a primary key. Not a single property is a primary key. Combination of properties. What and what combination of properties is a primary key? Roll number plus section. Okay. So embeddable class reference is called embedded ID. Who is my embeddable class? Student composite key. So what? I should write like this: private student composite key. For example, composite key. Now this is called embedded ID. Okay, so we must add the annotation called what? At the rate embedded ID is annotation. Next, column. Okay, column. Column name equal to S name. Okay, private string student name. Next, private integer marks. And all the remaining are what? Simply setter and getters. All the remaining are setter and getters. Am I right? Okay. All the remaining are setter and getters. Got it, right? Setter and getters. So finally, why I'm not writing at the rate column annotation here? I'm not writing at the rate column because variable name is same as the, no, we should call in reverse. Column name is the same as the variable name. That's the reason why we are not writing column annotation. Okay. This is called entity class. So two new annotations you have observed. One is called at the rate embeddable class, and this is called embedded ID. So when you are creating entity classes in JPA or Hibernate, entity class must contain either ID property or embedded ID property. Any one of the two is mandatory. In our last examples, whatever the two examples or whatever the example we discussed in the last, in that last entity class, we have ID property, but this entity class is containing what? Embedded ID property. Like, nice. So now, after creating the entity class now, so entity class is ready, embeddable class is ready. Next, we'll start DAO operations. Okay, DAO operations. Before I start writing the DAO operations, first I want to create a meta INF folder here. Where I should create meta INF folder under resources. Resources folder in the Maven project should contain meta INF folder. In meta INF folder, what is the XML file I need? Persistence.xml. So already in the last example we added now. So every example we don't write it, just we are going to copy paste it. Copy the meta INF folder from the previous project, paste it in the current project. Paste it into what? The current project. Now this is a current project. What is that meta INF? It contains what? Persistence.xml. And in this XML, what is the change you need to do is entity class. Right? So what is my entity class name here? Student entity. What about student primary key? Student primary key class is not entity class. It is called what class? Embeddable class. Correct? It is not entity class. It is what? Embeddable class. Here in this XML, what we need to configure? We need to configure only what? Entity classes, not what? Embeddable classes, not what? Embeddable class. We have to configure only what? Entity class. So what is the only one entity class that I have in my application here? Student entity. The only one entity class I have is student entity. So com.aat.entity.what? Student entity. Got it? Nice. Remaining nothing. I don't change anything. Coming to the next package. I want to create a new package. The package name I want is com.aat.dao. Okay. And in this DAO, whatever I say, com.aat.dao, I'm writing new what? I'm writing interface. I'm not creating class now, I'm creating an interface. And the interface name that I just want to write, the interface name is student DAO. DAO, I mean DAO. Okay, this is an interface now. It is not a class, it is an interface. Correct? And just I want to add two method declarations. I'll tell you. Return type is void. Okay, save student, passing the student entity. I want to pass the student entity to save the student. Correct? Then I want to load the student entity. Student entity, then fetch student based on the primary key. Primary key means here ID means what? ID is not a roll number, or ID is not a section. Here ID is nothing but what here? Combination of roll number and section. So we have embeddable class object now. Embeddable class object can store what and what? Roll number and section, because we created embeddable class with two attributes called roll number and section, right? So here ID means what here? Embeddable class object, embedded ID. It is not simple ID. It is what ID? Embedded ID. Okay. So student composite key. Say for example, composite key. Remember here ID is a composite key. Okay. We are done. Now just it is an interface now. We should start writing implementation class, correct? So what is my implementation class name? Student DAO IMPL, which implements what? Student DAO. Yes, let's go ahead. Guys, let's start creating a new package here. What's the package name? com.aat.dao.what guys? IMPL. Finish. New class. What is the class I am creating? Student DAO IMPL. Add what? Student DAO. Okay, let's go ahead. Okay. Are you getting my point? Next. This is my student DAO. Here, entity manager factory, what I told, like a session factory object in Hibernate, in JPA, we have an object called what? Entity manager factory. So first, I'll say private entity manager factory. I need entity manager factory. Suppose my reference variable name is factory. How can I get entity manager factory? Directly I can get equal to persistence dot create entity manager factory of what is the persistence unit name? Test. I used test now. I have used what? Test. Okay. Now this is my entity manager factory. Okay, nice, good. Let's go ahead. If I want to save a student, or if I want to load a student, whatever operation I want to do, whatever anything if I want to do in JPA, we need entity manager object. Entity manager requires a session, right? Like a session in Hibernate here, what is a object? Entity manager. So first create what? Entity manager. Entity manager equals to what I can write? Factory dot create entity manager. Sorry. Create entity manager. Yes. You know, what is created now presently? What is created currently now? Entity manager object is created. After creating entity manager object, what's the next step? Transaction is required because it's going to perform save operation now. So, you know, to perform insert, update, and delete operations, so what is mandatory? Transaction. So what? Next what? Next what? Entity transaction. Entity transaction TX equals to what? Entity manager dot get transaction. Understand, guys? Okay. Then TX dot begin. Keep a try block. Begin the transaction, keep try block. What should I do? I want to persist this entity. How can I persist now? Entity manager dot persist. Persist of this entity. If it is successfully persisted without any exceptions, what should I do? Commit. And to get a confirmation message, what I read, system.out.println. What happened? Object is inserted. So student entity, okay, is persisted to the database. Got it now? Right. Catch block. Catch block. And I just want to write superclass name as exception EX. What happens now if in case there is a problem occurred, then what should I do? Rollback. First do rollback, then display the reason. System.out.println. Okay, issue in persisting student entity. Issue in persisting entity or student entity. And I just want to display that exception message, EX. Exception type and message. Finally, what I want to do? Close. What I want to close? Entity manager dot close. Now tell me this comes under what now? Save student, right? What's the next operation I want to perform? Fetch student. Sure, we will do fetch student. Okay, right. Fetch student. Fetch student means selecting only, na? Right. To select a transaction is not required. Select means it's non-transaction operation. Just what is required? Entity manager is required. But what is not required? Transaction is not required. No need to begin the transaction or no need to commit or roll back the transaction. So what should I do? Simply, I need entity manager. Okay, let me do one thing. Instead of writing it, I'll copy it. Okay. Okay, then entity manager. I'm moving to this place. Okay. After creating entity manager, what's the next step? we want to call the method. Which method you have to call now? No transaction is required. You know that when transaction is required, if you are performing any insert or update or delete operation, then what? Transaction is required. Currently we are performing what? Select operation. For a select operation, what is not required? Transaction is not required. Just what can I do here? I can simply call find method of entity manager. I told find method to load early. Get reference method is to load lazy. Correct? I want to call find method. We are in JPA. When we are in Hibernate, what are the same methods? Equivalent methods. I mean, load and get methods. Load method can be used to perform lazy load operation. Get method is to perform early load operation. Right? What I just want to do here, I want to call find method. Student entity equals to, okay, student entity equals to entity manager dot, what's the method I'm calling? Find. First parameter, entity class. Who is our entity class? Student entity. So student entity dot class is the first parameter. Second parameter is what? Composite key. Because ID is required, na? But here ID is nothing but what? ID is a combination of what and what? In our case, roll number plus section. It is called what key? Composite key. So you may have a doubt from where I am getting this composite key. I am getting to this method as a parameter. When fetch student method is called, I am going to pass what? Composite key object as a parameter. So to fetch the student here, we need what and what? Roll number plus section. Both are required, not only the roll number. Okay. Close. Entity manager dot what? Close. Return entity. That's all. So in my DAO, how many operations are there? 2 operations are there. Okay. This is my DAO class, student DAO IMPL, which implements student DAO. DAO is a design pattern. DAO stands for data access object. It is a design pattern, which basically tells what? Separate the persistence logic from business logic. Don't write business logic and persistence logic combinedly in the projects. Define them separately. If you want to make any changes to the data access logic, you can only make changes to your DAO classes, not to the business classes. So that is called DAO design pattern, which is called loose coupling between business logic and data access logic of the application. That is the intention of DAO design pattern. So anyhow, okay, now I want to call the methods of this DAO class. From where I can call the methods of DAO class and we can test our application today? From main class. So that main class I want to include in one more package. Let me tell you what is my package. Okay, let's go ahead. Right click, new, one more package I'm creating. What's my package name? com.ait.client. In this client, I'm writing a new class and my class name is tester with main method. Let's go ahead. First, I want to create a DAO class object now. So how do I do that? Student DAO is a reference equals to new student DAO IMPL. This is a way of creating an object now. Actually, student DAO IMPL is what? Implementation class. And I am creating an object for what? Implementation class, but I'm storing that object in a reference variable of interface. Okay, what is my interface name? Student DAO. Okay, this is my interface. This is my implementation class. You got it, right? Next. I want to create what? I want to create the student object because I want to persist in the database now. Okay, observe here. Thing is, My student entity is containing what? What are the attributes or properties of my student entity? We have a composite key and we have the name and we have the marks, right? To set the composite key, I need to create an object of which class? Embeddable class. Who is embeddable class? Student composite key. So first I'm doing that. Our requirement is what we want to persist the student. See how I'm doing that. Okay, I'm writing a comment here. Save a student entity. Okay. First, student composite key. Okay, something composite key and some reference variable name is composite key. Equals to new student composite key. Means I'm creating an object of which class? Embeddable class. Then I'm setting the data to this embeddable object. What is the data I'm setting? Composite key dot set roll number. For example, roll number is 101. Again, what composite key dot set section. Section is A section. Section is A. Okay, next. What is my entity class name? Student entity. Okay, I'm creating an object for student entity class, right? Then what? Then what should I do? Entity dot set composite key of composite key. Entity dot set student name of some name. Okay, name is Rahul. Next one. Entity dot set marks of 500. Observe here. What I am setting to the entity here? Embeddable object. What that embeddable object contains? Roll number and section. Now this is acting like what key? Combination of these two values is acting like what key? Primary key. Primary key. Right. I want to save this entity now. DAO dot. Okay. What is the method in my DAO class? Save student. What I am passing as an argument? Entity object I am passing as an argument. So what? DAO dot save student of entity. Clear? I want to now, I just want to run this application. Before I run, before I execute, okay. Select star from TBL underscore students. What is saying that? Error TBL underscore students does not exist. Okay. We no need to worry about that, right? Automatically a table is created for us. Sure. Select star from TBL underscore student. Currently there is no table. Who will create the table for me now? Hibernate will create the table for me. What I can do now, I can run this application now. So simply I'm going to run it. Right click, run as a Java application. Tester class, run as a Java application. That's it simply. Okay. First what Hibernate did? Hibernate has first created the table. What's the table name? TBL underscore students. And what are, you can observe here, what are the columns? Roll number, section, marks, yes name, primary key of roll number, comma, section. You know how composite primary key is created in create table command? Yes. Tell me combination of what and what columns is a primary key? Roll number, comma, section, right? This is my create table query. Then what? This is what? Inserted. And what's the date? What is the message I got? Student entity is persisted to the database. Very good. Now you can see I got the data here. Yes, I got the data here. I got the data. See what is the data I got here? You can see. You can see the data what I got here. What is the rule number? 101. Section A. Marks 500. S name Rahul. Inserted. Let us add one more student. For example, Observe here. One more student. Roll number is 101 only, but section is B. Okay, right? You got my point? Yes. Next. Name is Sanjay. Marks are 800. Correct? Let us run this again. We'll execute this. Again, insert in. Are you getting any error? No. Why? Why are you not getting error when we are inserting again? Because even though rule number is 101, but what is different? Section different. What and what combination is the primary key? Roll number plus section is primary key. But here what happened? The roll number is matching, but section is not matching now. Let us see. Now you can see there are two records. What? Two records are there. Roll number is 101. Section is B. Okay. Now can I repeat? Roll number is 102. Section A. Yes. Okay. Roll number is 102, but section A. Yes, I can repeat. What and what combination cannot be repeated? Roll number plus section combination cannot be repeated. Okay. Now this is called what? Composite primary key. Composite primary key. Are you clear now? This is called what? Composite primary key. Yes, let's go ahead. Everyone, let's go ahead. I want to keep this code in comments. Now, what's the next operation I want to perform? What is the next operation that I want to perform? Fetch. I want to fetch what? Student. If I want to fetch a student from the database, I should pass what? I should pass composite primary key. I want to fetch a student with rule number 101 and a section A. Then tell me first what should I create? I am writing comment here, fetch student. Fetch a student entity. Tell me now. Tell me here, if I want to fetch a student, entity, then tell me if I need to pass rule number plus section as student primary key object now. So first what should I create? Student composite key. Okay, composite key equals to new student composite key. First create an object. Then what? Composite key dot what? Set roll number. Set the roll number. So I want to set the roll number as 101. Tell me what's the next one? What is the next one? Composite key dot what? Set section. What's the section here? A. Okay, then student entity equals to DAO dot fetch student of composite key. You got my point? Which method of DAO I am calling? Fetch student. What should be the parameter? When I'm calling the method, I should pass parameter, right? What object I can pass like a parameter? Composite primary key, composite key object. This key has what and what data? Rule number and section. Now display this entity. Okay, I can display directly the entity. Otherwise, I can write like this now. I mean, I can write override toString method to get the output. Otherwise, I can write SOP. I wanted SOP. Okay, SOP. I want to display the name and marks. Just two values. Okay, name. Entity dot get yes name. Next one. System dot ordered println, and what I want to print next? Marks. I want to display the name and marks of the student, right? Get marks. Now let us run this. So we got output printed over here. What's the output printed? Name is Rahul. Marks are 500. That's it. Okay. That's it. You are getting my point? Very good. When there is a composite primary key, you see in the select condition, in the where condition, how many conditions are applied here? Two conditions are applied. What and what are verifying? Roll number and section. Because here a single column is a primary key column in the table, or combination of columns is a primary key. Combination of columns is a primary key. That is the reason why it is using and in the where condition. That's it. I got the Rahul and 500. So basically, what is the example here? We want to know about how to use two annotations. What are the two annotations here we have used? One is embeddable. Next one is embedded ID. What is the purpose of this example? Why we have created this example? This example we have created to know about if there are combination of columns is acting like a primary key. That is called what primary key? Composite. If the table has a composite primary key, then how can you write a entity class to map it with the table? And how can you save the object to the database? How can you load the object from the database? That is my requirement. For that reason, we have created our example. And in this process, how many annotations you have learned? Two new annotations you have learned. What are the two? One is @embeddable and the other one is @embedded ID. These are the annotations you have learned. That is the purpose of this example, right? Yeah, guys. Everyone, have you understood this example? Type C or N in the chat box. Okay, right. Let's go ahead, guys. Let's move on. Now, next, let's go ahead and discuss. So, let us discuss some theory point now. The theory part is knowing about what are the entity states in JPA. I'm calling it as entity states in JPA. I repeat, entity states in JPA. Okay. Let's see what are the entity states in JPA. I'll explain you. I'm talking about a point called what are entity states in JPA. Okay. So JPA or Hibernate, whatever you can say, these are also called as entity states in Hibernate. So better entity states in JPA or Hibernate, like that if you read, that is better. You can use any word. I'm talking about entity states in either JPA or Hibernate, whatever it is. Okay. I'll tell you what are the entity states in JPA or Hibernate. The first state of entity is called as persistent state. Transient state. The second state is called persistent state. And the third state is called as a detached state. Actually, these three are called as what? Entity states in JPA or Hibernate. One is what? A transient state, and the second one is persistent state, and the last one is what? Detached state. Let us understand about what is transient state. See, basically, whenever you create a new object, Okay. Suppose if you want to save an object to the database, your requirement is what? You want to save an object to the database. You want to save an object to the database, correct? Clear. Point is, if you want to save an object to the database, first you have to create the object now. For example, I want to save a student object in the database. First, what I'm doing? First, I'm creating the student object. Then I'm setting the data to that student object. Then I can able to save it. Whenever you want to save any object in database, first what you have to do? You have to create the object. First, create an object. Then you can set the data to that object. Now your object is containing the data. Now you can save it. Am I right or not? That's what the process. Whenever you create a new object, when you create a new object, I mean, basically in simple words, I can say using new operator, whenever you create a new object for your entity class, then we can say that that object is in transient state. Which state now? Transient state. In terms of JPR Hibernate, when the object is created newly, and not yet persisted to the database. Object is created newly in the sense what? It is not yet stored in the database. That a new object is called transient object. Nothing but it is in which state? Transient state. Okay, transient state. Okay, do one thing. You call entity manager dot persist is a method you are calling now. What happens when you call entity manager dot persist? Whenever you call the persist method, you are passing that entity object as a parameter now. Right. When you call persist method, what is happening? Now the object is inserted in database. Am I right or not? Which we can say that what object is persisted to the database now. Means that entity is now in which state? Persistent state. Before that, it was in which state? Transient state. But when I call persist method, it has entered from transient state to next which state? Persistent state. Persistent state. And one more. Okay, understand one more. If object is in persistent state, object I mean entity. Here entity is nothing but what? An object of your entity class we are calling as entity. Generally we are calling entity. What is this? An object. Which object? Entity class object we are calling as entity simply. Okay, here what is my meaning of entity? I mean, don't understand. I'm not talking about entity. Entity meaning I'm talking about object. I'm talking about object of the entity class. For example, student entity is a class. You are creating an object for student entity class, na? That I'm calling it as entity. Okay, that I'm calling it as what? Entity. Yeah, understand clearly. I'm calling that as entity. Okay, observe here. Suppose if you persist an entity in database, when you persist it, then tell me that entity is now entered into which state? Persistent state. Initially it was in transient state. Now next it was entered into persistent state. If when entity is in persistent state, for example, when entity is in persistent state, if you make any changes to that entity, if you make any changes to the data of that entity, whenever you commit the transaction, automatically all these changes will be affected in the database also. Because that entity is in which state? That entity is in which state? Persistent state. Persistent state. For example, you close entity manager dot close, or you just commit the transaction tx dot commit. Commit in the sense transaction is completed, na? Transaction is completed, right? Okay, good. Once a transaction completed, once a transaction is completed, yes, completed. I'm closing entity manager, right? Entity manager dot close I'm writing. So whenever you close entity manager, whenever you close entity manager, or whenever you clear the objects from entity manager, because entity manager also occupies cache memory, like level 1 cache. In Hibernate, we discuss with the session object, na? Equal to what object in JPA? In Hibernate, session object is now here. What object? Entity manager object. Entity manager object also contains cache memory. Cache memory. Right? You know already how can I remove? How can I remove an object from the cache memory of session object? How can I remove an object from the cache memory? Evict method is there, EVICT. Or you can call clear method to remove all objects. But here, in place of session object, we have entity manager object. Here the method name is detach. What's the method name? In place of evict method, what method is given here? Detach. Clear is common. Close is common. But in place of evict method, what method is given here? Detach method is given. Detach. So when you detach the object from entity manager, or whenever you close entity manager, or whenever you clear entity manager, the objects will next enter into detached state. Which state then? Detached state. I repeat once again. Totally how many states defined for the objects in Hibernate or JPA? Okay, entity is nothing but object only, no? So what are the object states in Hibernate? 3 states are there for the object. What is that? Transient state, persistent state, and detached state. I'll write a code to understand it, okay? But first understand theoretically. So theoretically, what I'm saying first, transient state. When can we say that an object is in transient state? Whenever an object is newly created. Whenever an entity is created newly, it will be in which state? Transient state. Transient state. But whenever you save it, means whenever you persist this entity in the database, then yes, it will enter into persistent state. And whenever you close the entity manager, or when you clear the entity manager, or when you detach the object from entity manager, it will enter into which state? Detached state. Detached state. Like session object in Hibernate, here also there is entity manager object that contains a cache memory that is called level 1 cache. It's called what cache? Level 1 cache. Yes, it's a level 1 cache. Observe here. Let me explain. Okay, understand here what I'm trying to say. See here. What I'm writing here, point, I'm writing that. Okay, I'm writing that. Okay, so better I'm writing a point like this now. Okay, whenever a new object is created, whenever a new object is created for an entity class, then that entity will be in what state? Transient state. So after setting the data, to the entity, okay, we are going to persist. Yeah, we are going to persist the entity to the database. To the database. We are going to persist the entity to the database. Okay, so now the entity is in persistent state. Understand the theoretical points of what is transient, persistent, detached. Third point for detached state. Or the detached state here, when entity manager is closed, or when cleared, or when an object is detached. When an object is detached. You know that what, when entity manager is closed, or when cleared, or when object is detached, then what it will enter into which state? Then the entity enters into which state? Detached state. What? Detached state. So when entity manager is closed, or when cleared, or when an object is detached, then the entity enters into detached state. Okay, let us write a piece of code in understanding how it is working. Okay, now let's go ahead. I will explain. Okay, now we can say that the entity enters into which state now? Detached state. Let us see with the help of code, I will explain about. Okay, with the help of code, I will explain about. Okay, guys, the all the three states of the object. What are they? Transient state, persistent state, and what? Detached state. Sure. Are you clear? Let's go ahead. Look at this. For example, I'm writing code like this now. I have a code. The code I'm writing is like this now. For example, student entity, or any, for example, employee, assume that employee entity, employee equals to new employee entity. And of course, I'm setting the data employee dot set employee number, and for example, employee dot set employee name, something like. Then employee dot, for example, I'm writing like this, employee dot set sal. Okay, you might have understood, right? Employee dot set sal of 3000, and say employee dot set department number, and department number is, say, for example, 20. If you look at this entity now, first what I'm doing here, I am creating the new object for employee. Okay, what is my class name? Employee entity. What is my reference variable name? Employee equals to new employee entity. Nothing but what I am creating? I am creating an object. I am creating an object for employee entity class. It's a new object now. Now tell me now, this currently this entity is in which state? The state of this entity is now called transient state. Okay, transient state. It is in transient state now. Okay, observe here. Okay, it is in transient state now. Better I'll give like a box. It's in transient state now. It is in transient state. Up to this, it is in transient state only. What I'm doing here, I am creating a new object using new operator. Whenever you create a new object, when you create a new object for your entity class, then your entity is in which state? Transient state. It is in transient now. It is not in persistent state. We call that it is in transient state. But when we call that it is in persistent state, if it is inserted to the database, then we can say that what it is in. But how can I insert it into database? I have to call persist method. Are you getting my point or not? Okay. Currently, tell me this is in which state here? Yes, it is in transient state. Currently, it is in transient state. It is in transient state. I'm writing here. Transient state. Okay, let me do one thing. I will do one thing. What I do is I want to create one entity manager object. Entity manager equals to what I can write? Factory dot create entity manager. This is a way of creating entity manager object now. Of course, we need to have entity transaction object and blah 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 is required now. Okay, entity transaction. Observe here. Entity transaction tx equal to entity manager dot get transaction. The method name is what? Transaction get transaction. Tx dot begin. Okay, I'm not writing try catch block. Simply I'm writing tx dot begin. Then I'm writing what? Entity manager dot persist of entity employee. Say tx dot commit. Assume that I don't want any try catch funnel blocks. Now, if you look at this, okay, if you look at this now, whenever persist method is called, we are passing what entity now? What is the entity I'm passing? Employee. Tell me once this statement is executed. I repeat, once this statement is executed, which statement is executed? Only I am highlighting that one statement. If once this statement is executed, observe clearly. If once that statement is executed, which statement? Entity manager dot persist of employee. Whenever this statement is executed, then tell me this entity is in which state now? Persistent state. Now we can say that once this statement is executed, it is in persistent state. Okay, now the entity is in which state here? Persistent state. Okay, when an entity enters into persistent state? When an entity enters into what? Persistent state. When it will enter into the persistent state? Whenever we save, whenever we persist the object to the database, then it will enter into which state? Persistent state. Okay. Okay. Observe here. I have a statement like this. Entity manager dot close. I have a entity manager dot close statement is there. I have entity manager dot close statement is there. Entity manager dot close. Tell me now. My question is, when you close entity manager, you know the cache is also closed now. You know that point? Okay, you know that level 1 cache is closed automatically whenever you close the session object, right? Here in place of session object, what is object we have in JPA? Entity manager. What I am doing here? Entity manager dot close. Whenever I close entity manager, what is also closed? The cache is also closed. Okay. My question is now, once entity manager is closed, okay. Now here I am writing. Tell me this employee object is in which state now? Now this employee object is in which state? detached state. Employee is in detached state. So when can you say that an object is an entity is in detached state? When can you say that an object is in a detached state? When the entity manager is closed, or when you clear the entity manager, or when you detach the object from entity manager, then the object goes to which state? Detached. Initially, object goes to transient state. From there, next it goes to persistent state. Then next it enters into detached state. Okay, right. Detached state. Okay, right. Good. Now, observe here. Okay, listen clearly. Okay, observe here. Just in diagram to understand, I'm writing in the diagrammatic part. Guys, this is an entity. Assume that it is an entity. And assume that this is entity manager. Okay, just try to understand me. This is entity. I'm writing the point here. Guys, this is entity. Okay. And this is entity manager. Okay, tell me now. This is newly created. This entity is new. Tell me if this entity is new. It's a new entity. Entity is new. Then tell me it is in which state now? Yes, it is in transient state. Now it is in transient state. I'll repeat. I can say that it is in transient state. Okay, entity is in which state now? Transient state. Yes, it is in transient state. But when you call persist method, tell me, when you are calling persist method, see, observe here, when the object is in transient state, there is no connection between, or we can call the word association between that entity and entity manager. You can see the diagram there. Entity is there, entity manager is there, but there is no connection between them. If there is no connection between them, then tell me that object is in which state? Transient state. When you call persist method, for example, you are calling through entity manager object only now. Whenever you call persist method through entity manager, then we got a connection between what and what? Entity and entity manager. We got a connection between them. We got a connection between them. Yes, we got connection between them. Sure, we are getting connection between them. Yes, we got the connection between them. Okay, now tell me, we got a connection between what and what? Entity and entity manager. We got a connection between them. Tell me, when we got a connection between entity and entity manager, let us say that the entity comes into entity manager area. Now the entity is coming into entity manager area. Yes. Now this entity is into entity manager area. Now tell me now. Okay, now tell me now. You got my point? Now tell me, this entity is entered into which area? Entity manager. Means what? There is a connectivity between what and what objects? Entity and entity manager object. Now tell me, when there is an association between the entity and entity manager, means what? When an entity got association with entity manager, then we call that entity is in which state now? Yes, it is in persistent state now. Now we can say that it is in persistent state. Okay, it is in which state now? Persistent state. Yes, it is in persistent state. Okay, get the point clearly. It is in persistent state. Okay, right. Now tell me, for example, this entity disconnected from entity manager. Disconnected means when this entity disconnects from entity manager area. Whenever we remove in the sense what? Whenever we detach or whenever we clear the entity manager. Otherwise, when we close entity manager, it will detach from entity manager. Am I right or not? Nothing but what it is going out of entity manager area. So if the entity goes out of entity manager area, if this entity goes out of entity manager area, it is going out. Yes, it is going out. Right? What? It is going out. Tell me now. If an entity goes out of entity manager area. Tell me now, if an entity goes out of entity manager area, then we can say that what? This entity is in which state now? Detached state. Detached state. Now this entity is in which state now? Detached state. Yes, it is in detached state. Okay, let me write detached state. Okay, right? So basically, if there is no connectivity between entity and entity manager, okay, if there is no connectivity between entity and entity manager, then that entity is in which state? Transient state. When there is a connectivity is established between entity and entity manager, then entity will be in which state? Persistent state, right? And for example, if an entity is disconnected from entity manager, then detached state. So how can we disconnect? How can we disconnect an entity from entity manager? By closing that. Whenever you close entity manager, whenever you clear entity manager, or whenever you evict object from that, nothing but detach the object from it, then it is in which state now? Detached state. Like that, how many states are defined for an entity? 3 states. Object before enters into entity manager area, that is in transient state. When an object enters into entity manager, then persistent state. When it goes out of entity manager, then like that, how many states are defined? 3 states. That's a very simple way to understand about it, right? Okay. My question is, how can I make an object or entity? How can I move the entity from transient state to the persistent state? Call the persist method. What's the method name? Persist method. Persist method. How can I move an object from or entity from persistent state to detached state? How can I okay, how can I move it? By calling which method I can do it? Close or clear or detach. We have methods like that. We can do it. You are getting my point? Right. So basically, how can you identify that whether it is in persistent state or detached state? How can you? Okay. If it is newly created, it will be in transient state. No doubt about that. Whenever a new object is, whenever you create an object for your ND class, it will be in which state? The state of that entity is transient now. But whenever you call persist method, then your entity state will be changed to the persistent state. But whenever that entity manager is closed or cleared, then your entity will enter into detached state. If you make any changes to the entity in the detached state, then those changes are not affected in database. But if you make any changes to the entity in persistent state, then the changes will be affected to the database also. I repeat my point again. If you make any changes to the entity in a detached state, then the changes are not affected in database. But if you make any changes when it is in persistent state, then the changes will be affected to the database also because it is associated with entity manager. Detached state means what? Disconnected from entity manager. Okay, disconnected from entity manager. Of course, we are going to look at that, but basically these are the three states now. What are the three? What are the three? Transient state, persistent state, and detached state. Detached state. Okay, right? Detached state. So this document I'll continue for tomorrow to understand more things about this, and we'll discuss an example also for it. Okay, I'll also discuss an example for it now, right? So good to know. I'll continue on tomorrow. Okay, we'll continue on tomorrow. That's it for today. We'll continue on tomorrow.